Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Many of us are right around the lunch hour, and if you are eating lunch, please do so. And as you're watching, the next hour and a half will be together, a little less than that, to do the first workshop of a four-series workshop we're doing. Um, Connected to the design competition, the Salmon Packaging Design Competition. We are doing this competition. It is sponsored in collaboration with CMPC and Latitude 45, also supported by Inticel and Chile. And our partners here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the Cambridge Innovation Center, CIC, and us, MIT Design X at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So I'll give you a little bit more, a few more details about MIT Design X in a few moments, and I'll get started with the presentation. It is a I'll already tell you, it's not a traditional workshop where we're going to be going back and forth into different breakout rooms because we realized that's not exactly the right format for today. We will open it up for, of course, for questions and comments, in between during the presentation. And we'll also ask you to jot a few things down at your end. Um, but we do have a lot to present, but we're going to make it, it's going to be a few topics in one. It's going to be really interesting. And it is also, whether you're actively on the competition or not, you're going to find this helpful for your work or for your studies. We have a lot of students here and a lot of young professionals and a lot of people in industry. So this is a great mix of people. I'm really excited to be here. I'm sort of glancing and looking at all the faces here. So it's wonderful to see people on the other side. Um, I was just telling my colleagues I was doing this in person the other day in both in Venice and in Geneva, different workshops, but with some of the same material. And so I'm in presentation mode. I'm really excited about what we're about to do. So we now have, I think we have most people have joined us. Before I continue, though, I would like to pass this over to Felipe. Where are you? At CMPC. If you can give a few words to welcome everybody to this competition.
Yes, thanks, Gilad. Good morning, everyone. My name is Felipe Morales, and I work as an innovation manager at CMPC Biopackaging Unit. On behalf of CMPC, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the first of our four workshops in this exciting journey we are embarking on together. This program represents a unique collaboration between MIT Design X, CIC, MultiX, and CMPC. With a shared vision to explore and develop innovative packaging solutions for the salmon industry in the United States. Let me tell you that at CMPC, innovation, it is not just about new technologies or materials. It is about rethinking the way we create solutions that are sustainable, practical, and centered around people's needs. This is why this series focus on user-centered design development. It is so valuable for us. It allows us to connect science, design, and industry with a common purpose, creating impact through innovation. Again, I want to thank MIT for leading these sessions. Thanks, Gilad, and all your team, and all of you for being part of this process. Your perspectives and creativity will be key to shaping solutions that can transform our industry and set new standards for packaging worldwide. So let's take full advantage of this opportunity to learn, to collaborate, and design the future together. So thank you and welcome.
Great. Thanks so much, Felipe. This is we've been working on this for a few months now, and it's great to see the project started. I'm going to now give a little bit of introduction to Design X and explain why this makes so much sense for us to be a part of. So MIT Design X is a program at MIT. We're in the Morningside Academy for Design, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that and how we work. Actually, what I should do is start off by introducing myself. So I am the director of DesignX. I'm also a lecturer in the MIT Department of Architecture. I am an architect by training, and an urban planner, a designer, and then also a cook, a salmon lover, and a grocery shopper. So this made total sense to me when we heard about this competition and how user-centered design needs to be a part of it, and understanding the consumer, in particular here, the U.S. consumer, uh, how we make decisions. And it is not just about designing the end product. In fact, it's never about designing the end product. It's always about, at first, understanding the customer and their needs and who they are and how they think. So that is what brought us here and what brought me here. So yeah, so at first we said, well, why are we here? Now, what are we doing with this project? And it's, it starts with salmon, right? So the packaged salmon and how we get this to market in the United States. How is packaging? How are we going to have innovative packaging for an existing product? But really, why are we here? It's for these people, right? It's for us. It's the people who eat and consume food and make choices to select certain products over others, to have a reason for buying one product and not another, and what we do with that product. And that opens the door to a whole different approach to innovative design. So this is where it's user-centered design, not product-centered design. We're not starting with the cardboard box today. We're starting with the people. So the next four sessions spread over the next 2 months, roughly. I think six. Yeah, I think it's between now and toward the end of November. We have four workshops, and we decided to take a four-step approach to developing an idea, developing a prototype, and a submission for a competition. So normally, I'm sure everybody here has taken part in some type of competition, right? Especially the designers and the product designers and industrial designers in the room right now. You were given a brief. This is what it needs to, this is the size it needs to be, and this is what it needs to accomplish, and then you get going. And so that's one way to start a competition or to execute the competition. But we thought, well, wait a minute, what if we actually, within the competition itself, provide a series of workshops that will focus the participant in four different stages before they even get to the design. So we're not even we don't want you to start designing yet. Well, we don't want you to start building yet, right? To start making that final design. What we need you to do first is understand the needs of the consumer. So today's workshop is needs analysis. And if you've ever done a needs analysis, whether in industry, manufacturing, architecture, urban planning, or in industrial design or product design, it's about understanding what it is that the consumer needs or the client needs, what they're looking for, and then using your brain as a designer or your talent as a designer to do even more than that. And we're going to talk all about that today. In the coming weeks, we're going to do three more workshops, one on value proposition. So this is once you do understand who the customer is, who the consumers are in the US, you're going to think, well, what is it, the value that you need to provide them? And value can come in many different ways. We'll touch on that today, but we'll really focus on that next time. Number three, need solution fit is where you do the translation between the needs and the value proposition into an actual viable packaging concept, right? So this is where you start designing really. And that's where you start doing the actual specifications, size, format, material, usability, and of course the brand and the concept that has to be delivered with that product. And then finally, we do the user journey. Now, user journey and need solution fit, they go together. But in the user journey, it's about understanding the full customer experience, right? Not just getting a product at a store, but also what you do with it when you get home, or even before the store, how you even found out about the product, right? So discovery, making the decision to purchase, using a product, and what happens when you're finished, right? The user journey is everything before and after the actual use of a product. And it also includes the reuse of a product, right? Becoming a return customer or making sure that your friends and family become customers as well. So in today's workshop, we're going to focus on the needs analysis, and we're going to actually spend quite a bit of time at the beginning doing what we do for absolutely everybody who comes through any of our programs, which is understanding the design mindset or the mindset of a designer in terms of understanding user needs. We're going to get a little bit more into the details of the subject matter here and talk about how to discover consumer needs in the United States, and also interpreting behavioral and what we call psychographic characteristics. This will all make sense to you in about half an hour or so. At the very end, we're also going to open up a Q&A for competition requirements. So anybody who needs to maybe ask some more questions specific to the actual submission of a entry, we can do a bit of that at the end. In the middle, I'm going to open up the room for some comments, questions, discussion. So it won't just be me speaking. And of course, you can write items in the chat, and we'll take note of that as well. So just a little bit more about DesignX. We were created 9 years ago at initially at the School of Architecture and Planning. And then a few years ago, we moved into the new Morningside Academy for Design, which is a new academy at MIT, which actually takes design and applies it to all the schools. So design is part of engineering, design is part of science, humanities, business, and of course, the School of Architecture and Planning. And the idea was that the approach was really to have a transdisciplinary academy that doesn't look at design as something that should be siloed. And so industrial designers are should also be speaking, and I'm sure many of you already have, with behavioral scientists and with the engineers and the scientists and of course the business people, or you can be all of those, right? Nothing has to be we do not have to be categorized anymore. And so Design X, a few of the things we do is run an accelerator program for people who have new startups, new ideas. But then we also work with students and with companies really around the world, helping them with problem solving. Right? So we call this, well, we have a few terms. One is venture design, and then also solution design. Not everything is a venture, including what we're doing here today. We're coming up with a design, an innovative design for a product. And so our material is really meant to both inspire you and ignite you as designers. And then for people who are not designers, we always make a point of saying everybody is a designer because it's really having that ability just to think differently. It's not just about the talent of creating, which of course many people have those specific talents as well. And then also making sure that those ideas are deployed. And so here we do, of course, have working in this particular competition, an emphasis on sustainability, an emphasis on the product itself with using cardboard, and with this industry. So as I said, we do this with many people, with entrepreneurs, and in fact, anybody who's really taking part in this competition, uh, I will actually say that you're an entrepreneur yourself. You're doing something. You're designing something from your own volition, right? You're doing this because you want to. Well, you might want to win a competition. That's fair. But you also want to do something. You need to create something, and this is helping you. We do this with corporates and also with social organizations, and we're able to apply it everywhere because if you just look at the things in pink, we believe in creative optimism, learning by doing, experimentation, using empathy, and in that way, creating inclusive solutions that are respectful to all stakeholders. And this is really something that everybody should do everywhere. So it's not just a curriculum for startups. It's a curriculum also not just for entrepreneurs. It's really what you're going to see in the next few slides is really a different way of a different mindset. And so the all the things that we do around the world, and the one in pink is what we're doing here today, is applying this methodology to a design competition. We have been fortunate to work around the world, and I know many people here are actually joining us from many different countries and different states and cities. And this is, just this week I was in Venice and Rolle. If you look on that map, that's a town near Geneva. And I'll be in Dubai in a few weeks. And I guess one of the perks of the job is not the many long flights, but it's actually getting to meet different people in different cities and different cultures and learning different things about each one. And so that, in a way, is giving me the ability, my team, the ability to really learn from others and then translate it and connect it to what we see going on in other places. So you're going to be doing some of that here as well by looking at people and speaking to people and getting a better understanding of the US consumer and seeing how it applies to a product being shipped from Chile. Right? This is how the globe works now, and glad to have you part of that. So our framework, so this is how we're taking the same framework we use for many different applications and applying it here. So we have a four-phase framework: understand, solve, envision, deploy. Understand is what we're going to be focusing on today in particular. It's what on earth are you solving, right? And I say solving because this is a challenge, right? There is a product that needs to be designed, and we don't know what to design, right? That's the question here. What is the client, in this particular case, the consumer, looking for? We have to therefore understand them. What are their motivations? What are their challenges? Phase two is the solution. Well, once you understand the problem or the need or the demand, then you can start to create a solution, but not before. The next two phases we're actually not doing here, but that's where you find, and this is actually what CMPC, MultiX, and others will actually do once the design solution is provided, is okay, how do you put it into action, right? And then finally, and envision, but basically finding that mechanism to make it work, and then deploy, putting it out to market, right? Deploy is where it gets to the client. So here, what we're doing, we say always ideas into action. So for now, we're doing insight into design, which is the first two phases. So the first thing that we must do, and now we're getting started, is understand. So our curriculum has this squiggly line to explain what we do. And very scientific, but it basically says do a lot of work at the beginning, go crazy, go in circles, test, make mistakes. And if you get it right, then life becomes easy going down the road. And it also means that you're creating a product that is going to be received well by a customer or by a consumer in this case. So the messy part here, this is what designers do best, right? This is if you're trained as an official designer, whatever profession you might be in, you're trained to, oh, let's experiment, let's prototype, let's make something and then tear it apart again, right? So you're in the right place. This is what a design competition does. So if you're a designer or if you're not a designer, we're going to talk now about what is the design mindset. So the first thing is that design is this amazing ability that allows us to see things that don't yet exist. At the moment, we don't know what the final product is. Right? We can see examples of other things. We can see past precedent of things, of items, of products. But really, if we're being asked to design something new, that doesn't exist, we're creating. We're creating something. And the designer has to look a little bit into the future, right, in order to do that, because it hasn't been made yet. But the designer also has this a responsibility to look at the past and to understand how we got to where we are, And then most importantly, and this is where the user-centered design philosophy comes in, it's speaking to people right now and understanding what is their what are their issues and demands and needs. The designer, the ability to design, and so we work with other colleagues at MIT. There's actually, if you didn't know it, there's an art program at MIT. There's a lot of art. And in addition to fine arts, and there's no fine art MBA, sorry, no fine art degree, but you can get a degree in the arts, also in music and drama. But art is really just not just as a degree, but it's part of the work of a lot of departments at MIT. And the List Center, who does a lot of the public art displays at MIT and open classes, came up with these 8 words, to describe what a designer does or what design makes you do. And if you think about it, all of these words, anybody can do it. You don't have to be a trained designer to wander and to wonder, to imagine and then to reimagine, to explore, to expand, to think and to rethink. And if we think those 2 words with reimagine, rethink, I think those are the most important of the ones here, because it means after you come up with some idea, you question yourself, right? I've imagined something really interesting and innovative and new, and then you have to reimagine how could it be even better? You thought about something, and you should never be complacent with the first thing you come up with. You rethink. And then all those other words, of course, help you do all that. The act of design or the freedom of design really allows you to reach these goals. Uh, Everything here describes what design does or allows you to do or demands of you. So first of all, it's a process of discovery, right? You have to have an open mind when you design. And so with user-centered design and the research and what we're going to do to get started with this competition means that you have to have an open mind and not have the answer yet. You might think of something, and every designer, whether you're an architect or a graphic designer, will, when you first see the design brief, you'll think, oh, it could look like this. You can do that, but don't let that override the first step, which is understanding what are the needs. By non-system thinking, we mean that we're not just using a prescribed theory. We're not using it's not just a supercomputer that we're gonna type in, hey, I need this. It actually exists now with ChatGPT or with and Claude and all the other AI agents that we could just ask it, hey, I need this product, and can you do all the work and research for me? And yeah, it could, but it's I don't think it'll ever be the same. And I think that's why we still, as humans, talking to humans, will be more powerful. It turns out our neural network in our brain is still hundreds or thousands of times more powerful than a computer. Computer just might be faster at the moment by a lot. The third one is the plan to achieve solutions, not the solution itself. So design as a process and not as the end product. Design is an interesting word. In English, it's both a verb and a noun. It might be the same in many other languages. You design a design, right? It's kind of interesting when you think about that. So we're not going to work on the second design. We're going to work on the designing of that design. Bridging multiple points of view, that kind of brings us back to the transdisciplinary approach that a lot of universities now are using, not just MIT, which is how do we use the sciences, the social sciences, engineering, and design, and bring them all together and bring in different viewpoints. And so and I know there's a few people here that are working, some of the people submitting, I saw you're on a team, right? So you're already bringing in multiple viewpoints. And so use that power that you have there, uh, work off each other, and then ask other people while you're working on this. Share your ideas. The more you share, the better an idea is. That we've learned. I think everybody should know. Second to last one is creating meaning. This really is important for product design, of course. Creating meaning between things and humans, right? In the end of the day, we have to we hold our our products, our food, and we don't just use them, but we put meaning upon them. So in Italian, there's a word progettare, which means to project. That's actually the word for design. So design is actually putting a meaning into a product, a thing, an action, whatever you might be designing. And that means that we actually have a connection to it, not just for its function, but for what it means to us. So again, this all starts with therefore, the person, the user, the customer, the consumer. We have to understand what would something mean to them. What is the meaning they're looking for? That translates into a value. That translates into specifications of a product design, and that becomes the actual product. And then when that comes back to the consumer, they are then happy with it. If you don't talk to the consumer, if you don't do this whole process, then you're presenting them something, but you're just guessing. So this is an approach. We're using it now for this particular competition, but it's really an approach to use in everything you do. And the last thing is that as a designer, when you design, you have to accept that there might be more than one solution. Okay? There has to be. We know there is, right? There are thousands of options available. Which one is right or wrong? That's, it doesn't have to be, there is no binary answer, right? But which one will be most successful? Which is the most right for the time, right? That's going to constantly change. At one point, you have to make a decision and you have to go with one idea, and that's the right idea. But you have to be as confident that it's the right idea when you get to it. But I'm going to take you a little bit more into theory, and hope you're still with me. Now it gets into these complicated looking drawings, but I'll make sense of them, I promise. So we were actually doing a lot of thought on why we're using design and making something that should be simple, solve a problem. Why are we making it harder? And we actually think we're not making it harder, or at least we're only making it harder at the very beginning, for you, the designer. But it's extremely helpful, and it will provide the best possible solutions. The idea of design is like a vortex, right? I told you enter it and you don't know where it's leading to really, and it's messy and it's complex. You can make decisions and change things. Sometimes design specs change. We won't do that in the middle of the competition, but in life that does happen. And you come into a problem, sorry, into a design challenge. Um, like I said, you sometimes think of that you think of that final product, right? Or you have an idea of where it's going to be, or you have no idea. So you can come in, into the what we call the problem space. You're kind of starting there, traditionally here at the top of that left diagram. And then you work on the solution, and then at the end you deliver it and it has its impact. You can also think of the impact you want to make first, or you come in the middle with a little part of the solution. So you can kind of enter at any point. We do make sure that you go back up to understand the problem space first, but having that there. And then it kind of turns into this, you know, maybe a mess of a vortex at first, but then it develops into something very organized at the end. And you have to start disorganized. Okay. You have to start in that discovery mode, right? Where you can envision and prospect something that doesn't yet exist, and you talk to people and you get pleasantly surprised, or they give you ideas. I mean, that's what consumers do. And then you have to start making sense of it. And you start finding out that there's a lot of consumers that have the same need. And you start to synthesize these needs. And you start realizing that the meaning, exists, or the meaning is being demanded, and you can storify that, like, create that story. And then at the end, a design emerges. Design as a noun emerges. And that's where, after you do your pathfinding and selecting, you have that design, that product. So we'll get started. I keep on saying we're getting started as if we haven't started, but we're going to move forward now into the next this next sort of phase, which we call discovery. So all this, again, I remind you, it's all part of this needs analysis segment of the design process. So with discovery, uh, turning this now into something very a bit maybe more scientific and business-like, if you look at the screen, you know, to discover problems or demands or needs, there's a simple way that we don't even leave our computer for. We look at data. We look at data that already exists. Right? This can be consumer data. This could be consumer reports. It could be information we find through validated searches. And we can find out answers to some important questions about the industry. Right? We're not talking to people yet here. We're just getting some of this preliminary data, right? And this exists. We can find out how much prepared fish and seafood is sold in the United States. We can find out how much Americans spend on food and different types of food every year. We can find out how does salmon compare to the consumption of other fish, how much salmon from Chile is consumed versus other places. It might be harder to find these numbers, but I'm sure they exist. And I'm not presenting you the numbers. I'm not doing the research, right? I'm just saying the research that needs to be done, right? Fresh versus frozen versus smoked versus marinated. Maybe there's other ways of buying the product. And notice I'm not talking about the package at all yet. I'm kind of talking about the product. It's floating in space. And of course, other things. I'm going to use this word other quite often. That's for you to decide and for you to figure out. You could probably add dozens of other data points that you would need to find. Now, for these, again, you do not need to talk to the consumer, right? You might talk to somebody in the industry. In fact, the people in the industry know the best what's going on. People the fishmongers, the people who run grocery stores, right? They'll tell you the data. They'll tell you the numbers. And that's one way. That's one of the things you need, but it's not the only thing. Because remember, I said we're going to need to know value. Okay. We need to know what's the value for a consumer. And that's not necessarily going to come out of a data point saying how much fish they consumed. So how on earth are we going to measure that? What value are we not seeing? And the only way to find that out is to start finding out different data that is not necessarily, in fact, I highly doubt is going to be available on the internet. ChatGPT is not going to help us with this. It can make assumptions, it can make up interesting scenarios, but it's not going to tell us, how people design their meal plans, how they plate their food, how they present their food, what other things need to be on the table with that food. My food, and I'm saying food in general, but of course we're talking here about salmon. When and how. Right? So the first category we call style. The second one, when and how. So what days of the week do people eat salmon the most? Right? That's an interesting data point. Once you do the data and extrapolate it, perhaps you can do the report. But at the moment, we don't know. Maybe the industry knows. I'm saying this, and maybe somebody up on the call has actually, I've done it. I did the data. I did the research. But what times a day do people eat it? More for brunch, more for dinner. And the reason this matters is it's not just doing, collecting data for the sake of it. It's going to tell you something. And it's going to tell you something that should affect the design of the package that brings that salmon to market. It could actually make a big impact. What's the season that people eat it? Do they eat it differently in the winter versus the summer? So I eat salmon, and I would say yes. Right? There's different recipes that people use, and just depending on the season. Also, and this is maybe the who, different places have different, even in the United States. And so everything we're talking about here is specific to the US market. And that is the challenge of the competition. We're looking at the U.S. market specifically. But even within the U.S. market, you know, people in New Orleans might eat or consume salmon differently than people in Seattle or New York or Boston or Miami. Um, it's your job to find out, not everything, but as much as you can, and what matters to you. Who eats it, right? Not everybody eats salmon. A lot of people do, right? It's a very well consumed product, but not everybody eats it in the same way. That's actually something that's going to come up a little bit later. And here's that other again. Up to you to decide what other factors and what other things can you find out, right? Why are consumers buying this specific food item, right? This is one way of eating it, and this is another way. So just in my home today, it was preparing food for lunch for children and preparing food, for lunch for the adults. And what's going to happen for dinner? On Friday, I'm having 8 people over for dinner. It's going to be different, right? And you can only find that out by talking to the people. And in fact, the people don't even realize that they know this information. So when you speak to them, and we'll talk at the end about, the interview, the questions you need to ask. Um, the amazing thing is that people are like, huh, I never thought about that before. And they just start telling you. That is going to be golden information that you're going to use to apply to a design. Again, how do these factors, what you need to do, of course, is create that design of the packaging of the product, because at the end of the day, people need to make a decision between products. We have choices, right? We have lots of different products on the market. First of all, it's different food on the market. So it's salmon versus chicken versus tofu, right? And other products. But then, of course, it's salmon versus salmon. How are people going to make decisions buying one particular product over another? And then how will the producers compete? So let's think about these decision-making factors, because, we are not robots. And I hope we never will be robots. I like being that human. But we are creatures of habit. All right. So when I go shopping, I don't know if other people do this, I tend to go down the exact same aisles in the same way. And I hope that the products that I usually buy out of habit will be located on the same shelf every time. And I can't see everybody, and I'm sure there'll be some smiles. The worst thing is when you go to that shelf where a certain can will be located and it's not there. And they tell you, yeah, we moved it to aisle 8. Like, well, why would you move it to aisle 8? That's ridiculous. No, it was in aisle 6 for the last 4 years, right? I don't even think. I just know to go there and get it. And the funny thing is, a lot of supermarkets know this, and they actually locate the same product on aisle 6 and 8. And they actually put certain foods multiple times in the same supermarket in adjacency to other products, right? There's a science. I'm not getting into the supermarket science, but there's a big science about how things are placed. So if we are creatures of habit, yet we can make decisions and we can be influenced and we move and don't shop at the same place every time, what else is controlling us? How else do we make these decisions? Like what are the market drivers, that make me choose, I'm not saying me because I'm one of the consumers, make me choose one thing over another, right? This turns into value, and of course that will translate to design. But when it comes to specifically now, um, when I'm purchasing salmon in the store, right, I'm going to think about, at least I'll tell you me, but I'm sure many people think about health. What nutritional requirements influence our food decisions? I mean, lately, and for good reason, we're thinking a lot more about protein. I think when I was a kid, I did not think about protein. And I'm not sure if my parents thought about it. It was just there. I think we ate chicken at every meal. Um, as a child, it's just in my family and the culture I grew up with. And I guess that was the protein. Well, I guess it is protein. So we didn't think of it too much. But today we know to think about the protein and the carbohydrates and all the other minerals and vitamins that we get out of food and how much we're supposed to have in it. Back in the 90s in the US, they put the what we now know as the food nutritional um, um, label. I remember, I think it was 1993 or 1994, they introduced it. And I'm thinking, wow, we had no idea what was in our food before. Like we knew the ingredients, but we didn't know how much, what health it provided us. And so now, fast forward, 30 years later since that came, especially more recently, we care about health. That is a market driver. Quality is a market driver, right? We of course care about quality and safety. Maybe I put them together. You could think of them as different. I have to not just believe, I have to know, I have to have that assurance that what I'm getting is safe and of high quality. I also want to know that every time I get it, I'm getting the same thing, right? There has to be consistency. And these things matter. Food also comes in many forms, right? So when it comes to convenience, not just I can go to the closest store to get it or I can order it online. That's another way of thinking about convenience, and that might be a factor. But we really have to think about, you know, when I buy food, and I do this as the shopper. Okay, these are things that I'll spend hours working on for a big meal, and then I have to have stuff in my fridge and freezer that when my son comes home and he's hungry, there has to be food ready. So I need the 5-minute food, right? Different levels of convenience, different needs. How much of it? When do I need it, etc. You need to figure out. And then, of course, there's premium. We can buy different levels, different price points, and often it translates to the level of experience or by association, the premium factor. Okay, these are all market drivers when it comes to consuming food and to purchasing food in any form or fashion. Think of it now more specifically for prepared salmon. Okay. Again, everything that I'm talking about, I'm being a little bit general because not everybody here might be thinking of salmon at the moment. Um, but apply this to the competition for those who are doing it. Apply to their thinking in terms of the U.S. consumer and the product that is in this competition, the prepared salmon. Now, when we purchase, and I'm sure everybody is familiar with this. When we purchase things in a store, market, even online, we have a lot of decisions, multiple decisions for every single item. I mean, it kind of looks like we're like trying to figure out a physics exam when we're looking at like a product. Do I buy this? Do I get that? And you start doing the math, which has better value, which does have more protein, which is going to be, which is better, however, which way we might decide that. I often, I cheat. I get to my phone. I'll kind of look and see what people think about sometimes about a particular product. And these we're actually doing these multiple decisions per second. So, again, you don't need AI. We actually have AI, real eye in our heads. When people do studies of how we make decisions, it's pretty crazy. And we don't necessarily know sometimes how rational we're being. A lot of our decisions are actually irrational. And it's often made with the product and the way it's presented, right? You're already probably thinking, well, yeah, of course, it's how things are perceived. That's going to come up right here, right? So actually put perception together with market barriers. Perception is also what kind of controls or what might be the answer to market demand. But market barriers, of course, are price. Most people do make decisions, some part of their decision, not the only decision, based on price. So it's both a driver and a barrier, right? I want something that's cheap or that has value, right? Cheap and value are two different things, right? I want to find that deal. And sometimes things are just way too expensive, so I'm priced out. Okay. The complexity of food, different things can mean different things to different people. Of course, there's basic things like allergies and beliefs, that you have to contend with. But there's also just likes and dislikes, right? I often serve something and one family member loves it, the other one doesn't. So what do I do with that as the consumer? And what could you do for that as the designer? Right? So interesting question. The perception part here is, yeah, like connected to all drivers and barriers are the perceptions that consumers have of a product. All we know is either from experience with that product, we've already bought and eaten it, or we're seeing physical facts, or what we kind of say here, the meta connotation, right? What we think it means. And what we think it means is often presented to us in the packaging. In fact, that's kind of the role or the job of packaging. It's to let me, the consumer, when I see this on the shelf or wherever I might be buying the product, I have to perceive and believe that I want this, and that belief has to somehow connect with my values. Not values, my moral values, although it could as well. It definitely could play a role. But what other values that I see? And of course, the other category, fill it in as you need. So how now we have to do the hard work, okay? So how are we going to identify these trends or opportunities for innovation? And yes, some of it, like we said, exists in Google or ChatGPT, some of the most basic data points, it will find those. The other ones you're going to have to speak to people or observe, and we'll talk about that in a second. And you can also think, and this actually one I like the best, think into the future. Remember, we're designing something that doesn't exist, and you're designing, in fact, a product that won't even be on the shelf in the form that you're designing it, for months to come or a year, right? So we work a lot with startups who are creating something that won't be done for 3 years. So they're not designing it for today, they're designing it for the future. And if you can imagine what that future will look like, what consumer trends or demographics or other technology, adjacent technology exists, you will design a better product. And when it comes to the packaging of the salmon of the product, well, let's not just think of today, but how can we even affect tomorrow, right? Branding has this amazing ability not just to respond, but to actually affect the way people act. And if you can think, therefore, like, how are we going to make decisions in the future? I'm not talking the year, 2100. Okay, we need this ready for the year 2026 in this case. But how are we going to make decisions? How are we going to pay? Right? That how we pay today for things is completely different than how we paid just a few years ago. I'm lucky. My supermarket has one of those shopping carts with the scanning gun. So as I buy things, I scan it, and then I go to the exit, and it weighs it, and I walk out. I pay and I walk out. We of course use our phones to pay all the time. What does that mean? Does that have any influence perhaps in the design here? Who knows? How do we eat? Right? How meaning, where do we eat? Where do we sit down? Our kitchen design is very different today than it was a few years ago. Just think of like that open kitchen. How has that affected or changed food? Kind of interesting to look at. There are actually things written about that, about the fact that the open kitchen plan has changed the way we cook and present. All of a sudden, our kitchen is in our living room for many people. And of course, how do we cook in the future? Right? So imagine, back in the 60s, I guess, when there were no microwaves, and then all of a sudden microwaves came. Think of what a fundamental change that did to food packaging and to the type of food that we could actually buy and bring home. And go back 100 years, then we're talking about the ice box, right? So things have evolved. There's no reason why it won't keep evolving or changing, right? We're not the future is not finished today. So think of each one of these and how that might affect things. So yeah, I always love using this one because the designer, the innovator, the person, the engineer, um, if they only rely on what the what the client or the consumer tells them, they might not see something that they do, right? So your role again as a designer is two things. It's yes, to be user-centric and respond and listen to people and observe, and that's the majority of what you're going to do. But you also have to have that vision and you have to combine them together. So Henry Ford said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Because the concept of a car was still foreign to most people, right? So Henry Ford was trying to do this mass production in America of a car that was already invented in Europe, but they didn't know what it was, right? There was not. It was a. They just wanted to get from place to place quicker in their individual vehicle, and then he comes along and says, "Yes, you can do that, not with the horse, but with this new contraption." Okay. Pardon me while I take one break. If there's any questions, I'm happy to open it up. So I'm not just speaking. I don't see anything in the chat. But if somebody wants to just either raise your hand or just open up and speak, because there's a lot of people here. Okay. You can do that later or send a note anytime. Oh, Diego, wonderful. Um, let's unmute Diego. Hi,
Hello,
Diego.
everyone. Yes, um, here Diego from CNTC Chile. I have a question about um, how important is the demographics change, for instance, like in our different countries and different markets. Um, for instance, uh, like young people is the proportion to the population is even lower. So what we have seen or what I have heard many times is take note of what the young people are doing and their behavior patterns. But what happens now? Because that proportion will be lower in the future. So maybe we have to take account both young people and old people. What is your suggestion in that case?
Yeah, so it's actually perfect timing for this because you'll see in a minute we're about to get into understanding different ways of categorizing consumers. And the first one is actually, or the first two are demographics and geographic, right? So if we think about the demographics, that opens up this one of the main demographics is, of course, age, right? We can look at gender and socioeconomic position or different ways of thinking about demographics, but age is a big one. And if you're designing and if you're producing something for the current generation, but that might be different in 5 years from now, you should definitely keep it in mind. But especially with something like a food product, um, that might change over years, right? What you need to, and that's why you have to keep on doing this. So I would say my answer would be looking at the what is going to be the sort of trend for the next 5 years. Now, you don't necessarily need to do something that's a 10 or 15-year projection, right? If you're doing something, doing a pension plan, that's one thing. But you do need to look for a few years and then also see, is there, will the different demographics, is there something that can be designed that for both of them, right? So you don't have to design one thing and ignore the other one. In fact, often you see that it's things are designed purely for kids, right? So if I'm designing a cereal box, it's for children, right? For them to then tell their parents to buy, or clothing, right? They're specifically looking at a market, and and that's what they design for. Here, the market is broader. People really of all ages who purchase it do love the product and do eat. Um, and it's a matter of, perhaps making something that is more family friendly in appearance versus Gen Z looking. Again, it's for the designer to think about and get those statistics and then make the right product design that can answer what they discovered. And then being innovative. So I don't want to say what to do, but if you're thinking about, okay, I want to react to multiple demographics, what could I do in the package? What innovation could I do if it's needed? First of all, make sure it's needed. Um, I think Felipe Santa Maria, and then Luis.
Hey everyone. I had one question when you were talking about identifying what's the value that the customer perceives. In this case, from the salmon, you were mentioning some questions about the data collection and stuff like that. I wanted to ask, like, what you recommend mostly by doing that assessment. Like, is it better to use a more structured dynamic to get the information, or you can take the same results like having a regular interview or just a conversation?
So I'm actually going to get right into this in a few minutes.
Great.
I'll probably answer that question because it's a
Thank you.
combination of a few. So I won't answer yet because it's coming in like 5 slides. So uh, perfect. And also the previous question also is going to come up. So I'll take one more and then I'll get right into all that. Lewis. Oops, sorry. Can you unmute or how do I do this? I think Lauren.
So, yeah, you might be answering this later as well, but I was just going to ask what the specific drivers were for making this like an open project and what you're hoping to get that's different that you might not get from like an internal research and development.
Great question, and we don't have a slide for this, so I can just answer this right now. So the goal here was to have people who are closer to the coming with different perspectives, and in particular having a connection to the U.S. consumer market. I know some people here are not in the U.S., but you all registered with that understanding, and you might have lived there or are expats or whatever, or you're just going to dedicate your research to it, and having that other people perceive it rather than the people who have been working on it for the last 10 years opens up something new, right? And so that's one definite driver. And then, of course, giving this great opportunity to young designers, I say young, meaning not just in age, but sort of often it's people who are newer to the profession. As an architect, I did a lot of design competitions, and it was fantastic because it's something that helped. Well, it changed the way I approach design. It was great practice in a real setting rather than working on a fantasy project. So this is real, right? And this is something that will be turned into something real. So it's an opportunity for both.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, so wonderful talking to people too. I always feel bad when I'm just speaking and I'm like, is there anybody there? Okay, so I'm going to now jump into behavior. I just got to press one button on my computer. All right. So consumer behavior, again, there's different ways of understanding this, and there's different ways to understand it. So I'll get to that in a second too. How to observe, how to interview. But if we think about, there's a lot of statistics. Some of them already exist. Some you might need to find out. What percentage of U.S. adults eat seafood more than twice per week? So I did actually find that statistic. I'm not putting it down there. It could be different from different sources, but also I don't want to influence or tell you what to do exactly. But trends. So another example, people seek protein in their diet. I think that's true, right? Also, if you think something's true, you still do have to prove it and at least find enough data points that show to yourself that you're on the right, that you're doing something, that you're going to react to something that's real. More people shop online than before. We do know that. And okay, you need to explore lifestyle, culture, future trends, and also hybrid situations. So again, we eat differently than we used to eat. We put foods together that we didn't used to put together, right? And that's because of a lot of fusion between different cultures. Chefs, not even chefs, but people have gone from country to country and started blending things. This is not new. We've been doing this for thousands of years, right? This is why we have, or hundreds of years. That's why we have ceviche and sushi and Japanese influenced food in Peru, right? It's not just by chance. So what does that mean again for this particular market at this particular time in the United States with with salmon from Chile? And that last one there, that's kind of where the innovation is born, right? So I don't know what those are. That's what you're going to work on. It's not just finding what other people have already found. If you can find something different, right? That's where the that's where you can be innovative. So to be innovative means to not just create something new, but to create something new that has value, right? To create something new is to invent. So a lot of people come up with things, but if nobody actually needs it or there's no value and it's not going to work, I mean, not going to work, okay, you can experiment, but then there's no innovation. So it's not just about having something new. The word value has to be attached to make something innovative. So, okay, here's I promised you this slide would come, the market segmentation categories. So this applies to everything and everybody. Every startup, every business in the world uses this when they think about their clientele. And, some things will matter more than others. In this case, like we said, age could be very important. Um, it could be that occupation has some relevance here. Geographic, we already know we're talking about the United States. If you think that there's a difference between the suburban or urban markets, you can look into it. You could look into it and decide there isn't, there is. You could decide there's no difference between the way genders approach the consumption of salmon. There's probably some data point that says something, but it's up to you to decide how to use that. So those are what I call the easier ones, the geographic and demographic. It's kind of an exact science. Somebody up to the age of 25 and somebody between the age of 26 and 35. There's no, it's just, it's a very simple data point. The next two, psychographic and behavioral, and this is a general way of dividing categories of people in psychology and behavioral sciences. We just apply it to business. So psychographic is how you might feel, or a belief, or a personality, and the passions or attitudes that people have. So this one is actually really, really important. It's harder to find out without observing or talking to people, or finding I'd say not the data, but the results of somebody else who might have already done that work. But it's actually a big opening here because that affects how we purchase, right? Not just our age, but much more in the psychographic, and then also over there in the behavioral, right? Are we active or passive? Are we risky or are we risk averse? So if you think about the more obvious items like the Red Bulls and power drinks, right? Those are designed with a certain demographic and behavioral and psychographic clientele. It was not designed for my 93-year-old mother, right? She's not being advertised power drinks, right? Um, and even I'm not sure if I'm maybe a demographic that's being, I mean, age-wise, I might be, but I'm not exactly the most risky person, active person. Um, if that's something that they're thinking of, and I guarantee you they are. And the same thing with any consumable product. So apply these categories, like think of what it means. It doesn't mean that you then knock one out, but think, what does this mean? And is this would this be a good approach to design that would increase sales? Or again, you don't want to make something that's going to lose clientele. Think of other when you can look at other examples while you're doing this of other products and just think a bit about what they might have been thinking about. So that's kind of like the reverse engineering of a product. And why on earth did they put that on the label? Huh, not probably, there should be a reason. Um, or why is something in a certain shape? There's a reason for it. There should be a reason for it. And I think you all, if you now use this approach, can come up with some really interesting ideas. So another thing that's sort of tied into into this whole section is, what are people expecting? Okay. And this is where actually I threw in sustainability and cultural awareness. S- How does sustainability and cultural awareness play a role right now in the US consumer trends? This is, again, it's not the same everywhere, and it's not even just geographic. And in the States right now, there's definitely a lot going on, one could say, and there's different approaches to products, a lot more because of that psychographic, that belief and belonging category. Think about it. It doesn't mean you design something for, for only one people. That should never be the answer, in my belief. But think about it because you're the ones who are coming up with the design. And then now I'm kind of we're not just in a bubble of any product or anything. We are talking about packaging. Right? You're not redesigning the edible product itself, the tuna, sorry, the salmon. You are talking about the packaging of the salmon, right? So, okay, well, how is that? What demands are there of packaging? Okay, if you see where I'm going, right? What is the and it could be Gen Z, it could be Gen X or millennial or whatever way you want to divide up people. Uh, and I often find a problem with the word Gen Z and Gen X as if I don't think one way versus another way. I, I guess there's probably like an 80% of people that maybe fit into a certain category. And that's why we use them. But yeah, what are they? And if they're the growing generation, like was asked before, then yeah, what are we expecting in that package? What recycling options or upcycling options are they looking for, or also, already exists? Of course, this is something very specific, and this is where, this is more scientific. Sorry, the environmental, the eco regulations. Okay, where is it? There are cities in America and some states where there are bigger regulations on packaging. There's no plastic bags allowed in some places, or at least you have to pay for them. So we're not talking about plastic here, we're talking about cardboard, but what else? How else could this somehow affect the design? And of course, your job is to find out other things. The last thing I'll leave you with is the research methods. And so this is, I think, Felipe's question. Okay, how are we going to do this? How are you going to find out, right? So there's four main ways to conduct research of consumer needs. And one of them is to conduct interviews, and I'll show that. I have a few slides specifically on that. Another one is observations. So I actually worked for a company called Space Syntax back in 1999 in London, England. And Space Syntax was trying to understand, and they still do, the behavior, the where people go, where people walk, this decisions they make when they're entering a subway station, or in the case the project I worked on, what they do when they go into Selfridges. It's a big supermarket and store in London. And my job was to follow people, okay, with a little, I don't think I even had an iPad. I don't know what I used. I guess a piece of paper because it was 1999. And I had to follow people and just see how long they would stop somewhere, where they would turn, and we are trying to see what color was actually, affecting them. And it was observations. It was a lot of fun. Sometimes people would think I was stalking them, and I had to show my badge. But it was really eye-opening for me because, like, oh yeah, there's a lot of there's reasons why we do everything, why we choose one thing, why we reach for one thing over another, right? And again, the supermarkets are they're pros of this. They probably have big departments. The third thing is the surveys. So interview, you meet somebody in person. Observations, you don't have to speak to them, but you see what they're doing. The surveys is kind of interviewing without being in person. It's it's also effective. You can reach more people, of course. And the last thing, and these kind of lead to it really, is the experiments, right? This is where you kind of sort of maybe create. I think I'll talk about a little about how you can't represent yourself, of course, as anything but an individual. And so you're not conducting any of these interviews, observation surveys, or experiments on behalf of anybody who's running the competition. This is just about you as a student or designer, um, taking measure. So just want to make that point. But experiments, how can you, even seeing how people make a decision, if you can actually create that A/B situation where there is that choice, that's another way of doing the research. Because otherwise, we're just making assumptions, and most assumptions are wrong. Okay. This wasn't me. This is Albert Einstein who came up with that. So I'm going to go with it. I do believe it too. We think we're right, and then you don't want to think you're right when you're spending a lot of money or designing something that's going to be put into mass production. You want to know you're right. So research comes into play. You establish the needs and you establish also the expectations before designing either a solution, a feature, or a product. So we want to go directly to the stakeholders, in this case, the consumer, and understand who, what, why, and how they operate, they think before we design. Now, as I said this, I was also, because we put the word stakeholder, uh, there's there are other stakeholders involved here, which you might want to think about as well. And those would be the stores, right? Because they're actually somewhere in between the producer and the consumer. You might want to think about that. Does that matter? Will that affect anything? Again, we're kind of open here for innovation. And the last thing I'm going to sort of end here with is how is the need classification. So this is research done at MIT and on product design and development. And there's three levels of need. So just like there's the Maslow's, hierarchy of needs, this is sort of a riff on that, just looking at consumer behavior. So first is and the point is that how we know what the need is, right? So there's the obvious explicit need, easy to express. Unfortunately, this feeds assumptions, widely known and understood, and you're likely to fulfill that, right? This is when we know that people usually buy this, or they prefer red over blue. I don't know. Whatever. I'm just giving two broad examples, but that's an explicit need that we can easily find out, right? The next one is unfulfilled. So these are actually also relatively easy to express, but generally not fulfilled because they're a little bit more difficult to address. And humans in general like to do things that are less difficult first. I guess that's the answer. The third thing is latent. Okay, so here's where, again, there's a lot of innovation because it's both hard for a customer to express, it's not yet widely understood, and it's currently unaddressed. So the idea here, the theory is that people do have these needs, these demands, these likes, right? But they don't know how to tell us. Therefore, we don't know. Therefore, we're not creating a solution for it. But the first one who can, boom, right? That's sort of a great place to be. It doesn't mean you have to reach it, but you should take this approach as well. So two ways really of doing qualitative, right? The quantitative is you can do it from your computer for the most part, or just do some basic observations and surveys. You'll get the quantitative results, but the qualitative is where you need to do more of that contextual observation. So looking and really understanding, getting a deep understanding of why people are doing what they're doing or choices they're making. And then, of course, there's the interviews, right? So nothing beats talking to people. This is actually saying, these two graphs, that you don't have to talk to a lot of people, right? You don't have to go and talk to 500 people or 1,000 people or even more than 10, right? So the one on the left is actually saying that there starts to be, less of a return on investment once you get up to 9 respondents, right? From 1 to 2, of course, you're definitely getting better needs. In this case, they're measuring the percent of needs identified. Once you get to 9, and it starts to taper off, you're not learning as many new things. So 9, 10 interviews or observations might be enough. The second thing is showing the quality really of the interviewees. And here's where you're looking at not just any customer, right, the mainstream, but actually the more lead or extreme user. Okay, again, translate this into the salmon consumer, because then you're going to find the more specificity of needs, not just common, right? The more special you can be, there's a better chance of breaking into something new versus common. But then you might be thinking, wait a minute, I want to make something that is going to be as general as possible. So that's a question for you. How specific or special and innovative should something be, or how general and widespread it should be? Um, that we're going to leave that up to you to decide. Can you do both? That would be the perfect thing. And just a few last things, and we're going to then open up for Q&A on the competition. Is when you do interview, just a few of these I'll read out. Just one interview, one person at a time is often better than having a group because then they'll be more open to you. Be excited. Jump to number 4. Be excited when they do tell you something. Don't just also don't just agree with everything they say. And we're going to ask, and also to avoid that, you don't want to ask questions that are yes or no's. You want to ask open-ended questions so that it generates a conversation. So then it's no longer, you might only have 2 questions that you get through, and then they just fill in the rest. You want to focus on their behavior, their actual behavior, what they're saying, exactly what they're saying, and exactly how they're expressing themselves, and not just what you feel they might be. 8 is listen more and talk less, or get to a point where you don't even talk. You're just listening and taking notes and learning from them. And then you don't really need to ask for introductions in this case, but write up your notes as quickly as possible. So the last thing is just, make those questions open-ended. Whenever you interview, you're not doing a survey, right? That you can just send on a survey. But you want to ask open-ended questions. So, and these are specifically ones I was thinking of here, just to get you started. How do you plan a brunch? Okay. We're not even asking about the salmon, but that might be the opening, right? Or, you're talking about that, but oh yeah, what else is on the table? What else, how do you present things? How do you take things out of a box, right? Things like that. How do you judge quality? Now we're talking about the actual product. What about where you buy it, right? So what is your experience like in that supermarket? And then just in general, what last time this happened to you, or another general, what affects your decision making? And then of course, follow up with whys. Whenever they answer something, you ask why. So I might just skip that. It's just saying the same thing, but this is it for the first workshop. And our first instruction to you is don't start to design. Okay? Don't just leave this and say, great, I got a perfect idea for a box. Because then I would say you didn't learn anything, right? We just told you not to do that. We said go out and find out everything you can about the consumer, and you're then going to be able to next time start working on the design of a box. But let me say, first of all, thank you. And I'm going to actually stop my screen so we can see everybody, because we have a lot of people. Okay. I'm going to open the chat too. So Nufu, I see you asked the question probably right before I said it. What number of interviews can be considered a good start? So 9 to 10. And Margaret, how could these different research methods be translated into more specific categories? For example, observations could be framed as ethnographic. Experiments might correspond to, yes. So it's up to you to decide how to apply this. Now, this wasn't a course on behavioral science. Okay, that will take 4 months. Okay, this is behavioral science in 15 minutes. You can read up on behavioral science, or there are plenty of excellent texts on it. We're not training you to be a behavioral scientist. That is, people spend years doing that, but using just a little bit of it, right, in this one class here. The next one now, Felipe, you're going to have to help on this one because there's some specific ones to the competition. Peter asked, what role should plastic play?
Okay, thanks, Gillette. Well, actually, we're not producers of plastic, but we know that sometimes we need to mix the materials. But we're not looking at any specific role of plastics. Um, in this case, in the salmon, they are contained into some plastic bags with a vacuum, but we are trying to focus and to push forward the use of cardboard or paper-based materials.
Got it. Then I was going to write an answer, but that's silly. I can just say it quicker. Lewis asking about how we do have a lot of people who are from outside the US. If you happen to be from the US originally, you might have a better understanding and a new perspective from outside. But otherwise, you're going to definitely need to immerse yourself with with the US market. It's up to you you can, right? Either from afar or with Americans and kind of use that as your base, or it's doing some research. You can also do your interviews can be by phone. So there are different ways to do it, if you're not physically there. Another question, again, I'm going to bring you back, Felipe. Is the company looking for something dramatically different than what currently exists?
I can see that we hope so, but anyway, you can design something related with the culture. You can understand the habits and the people that are going to use this packaging once at the supermarket or in other place. So you can also, let's say, innovate through graphics, for instance.
Right. So again, there's innovation through graphics and through the package itself and through the meaning of it, right? And remember, this is a three-dimensional object with multiple sides. Um, Definitely think about that. Think about how it's produced as well. And I know there are a couple of videos. So, and this uh, we're using an application, so the accelerator app, to both provide you links to things like getting you here to the workshop and future workshops. And then when time comes in November, we open up another piece of the accelerator app to actually submit your work. So it's all going to happen through there. You won't need to do any emails. You can always email us now that you have it as well if you have any questions. And then we'll try to answer big questions there too. But make sure that well, I guess you're all here, so you did get the emails because sometimes I know the people might end up in the spam, so just make sure that you always get them. The but yeah, the all the pro I know we have all the items related to the competition on the Dropbox. We'll make sure that all the logos are there in the highest quality so you can use them as well because you need to apply. Felipe, it's correct. The CMPC and sorry, I'm just blanking for a second. So the logos, we can just maybe go over how the logos need to be applied to the packaging.
Uh, it is not necessary that
Oh,
you use our CMPC logo. It is more important to use the graphics of Latitude 45, but it's the brand of Multi-X in the US.
of course. So it's the Latitude 45, and there's a whole design guideline branding with all the details there. Okay. And just this last one here I'll answer from Felipe. Felipe Santamaria, how can you know that the insights you are getting from the conduct from the analysis are good, meaning they're going to be useful to raise a new packaging proposal? Well, you're going to have to make some analysis of the insight, and again, if you only ask one person, then you will not know, and it could be wrong. When you start to see some trends, when you start to identify, when you compare it with some other knowledge, and at some point you take a chance, right? And this is you're making a proposal, but the more work you do on the research and sharing it, even with friends and family before you submit, you'll have even more insight, perhaps. Um, so there's no good answer until you have that experiment on your end. And of course, the when you have the best, uh, again, the design will emerge based on the work that you do. And at some point, it's like, yep, this is a great idea. And of course, it goes before the judging committee, and they'll decide. I didn't get the email to access the app, Matthias. Okay, but you're here. If you can write, if you have I'm just going to put my name here, and I'll connect the whole group. So if anybody has trouble, write that, send me a message, and I'll help anybody specifically. Lauren and Ale and I can help you out there. Would it be possible to have a visible reference of the plastic trays in which the salmon is contained and of the actual packaging? Felipe, what can we do there?
I think those documents with the technical specs are also uploaded in the platform of MIT. They
Okay.
should.
And they including
So for sure you can download all the specs of the plastic trays.
Okay, the specs. But I guess
There's no visuals.
but no visuals. Okay. Yeah, like photos or visuals. Is there anything that can be shown?
We can upgrade also that information so they can see the visuals of the plastic trays.
Great. So yeah, within 24 hours, we'll try to have that on the Dropbox.
It will be very useful. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, this has been hope this has been useful for you and a good hour. I enjoyed it. And we will see you next time in a few weeks. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.